because we went up a mountain, and we took a drone. We had a friend of hers came with us. We took a drone up a place called that looks like a breast. It's called Knocknarea. I don't know if she told you about this.
No,
but there's a mountain called Knocknarea, which is near Tara's house, and we can't get to the very top. It's actually a burial chamber for a queen who is buried upright, standing, holding a weapon, pointing at her enemy. But you can't reach this place where she is. And we sent a drone. And at the very end of MAMMARY Mountain, what you do is you're standing on where the dead queen is, but half in, half out of the burial mound.
Rather than being excluded, because I think a lot of people do feel very alone and excluded from society. And like I said earlier, this idea of the body kind of betraying you almost, the things that you always thought you could rely on your body to do, you can't really do anymore. So I think in terms of just getting the piece to more and more people, because 1 in 2 people is going to be affected by cancer. Every time, by the time
2050, I guess there's a report.
And just that sense of building on the narrative, but adding I think in some ways the embodiment is more effective or affective in underlining the emotional experience of the stories. Because I think, you'd have to be a very cold person to listen to the stories and not feel emotional. But I think when you add that layer of putting it on the body, it then becomes not an external thing. This is somebody else, but this could happen to me. So I think it just adds that subjectivity to the storytelling.
Yeah. Yes, very, very much so. Hello, Tara, and thank you so much for joining me on this first episode of Eventist interview series. And I'm so happy to have you and MAMMARY Mountain. We met during the 81st Venice International Film Festival, Venice Immersive 2024, and you were showcasing MAMMARY Mountain there. And welcome. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Yeah, it's been an amazing year.
And you recently won an award on Filmgate Miami.
We did.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a lovely surprise. Really, really lovely. We weren't expecting anything like that at all. So, yeah, I think it's really good as well, because it shows that other kinds of work are being recognized for different things. Because MAMMARY Mountain definitely isn't a joyride. It's it's quite a deep piece of work. So it's really, really lovely that it was recognized for that.
Yeah, I mean, during the experience, I really felt very connected and immersed into the whole story, your poetry and the sounds and the environment and everything. It was like very immersive for me, and how they reflect, how all the people and you are reflecting on their own treatment faces. And the experience starts with the diagnosis phase. And through the process of creating this piece, how does it help you to navigate and reflect on your own experience?
It's a really good question. I think in one way you have to place your own experience a little bit outside of yourself to successfully navigate kind of manifesting it in an art form. So I would say that while it was cathartic to a certain extent, it's only really in the last few weeks that I've kind of been able to look at the effect of making the work on my psyche and my metaphysical self. So yeah, it's I think to a certain extent you have to have a little bit of distance while you're in the process of the making. And I think it was quite intense for both Camille and Maf'J as well. So we all had to remind each other a little bit, to make sure that we were staying true to all of the voices, which was really important, but also staying true to truth itself and maintaining truth without getting overly emotional or too deep in my experience. So kind of keeping it to a certain level at a distance. Yeah, but it's a really good question.
Yeah.
It would be very difficult to make this kind of work without having the experience, having had the experience. So I think there's a duty of care to oneself, but then also to the other members of the team and to the participants, the wider participants that took part in the piece and that gave their stories so generously. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think in the end of the day, everyone's point of view is kind of different due to their background, how they're living.
Yeah.
And your piece combines VR illustrations, your drawings, your beautiful drawings and poetry, and field recordings, and of course a personal storytelling. And how did this project relate to your other works? Because you're a very active interdisciplinary artist.
Yes. I think that my practice as an artist is not separate from my life as a person. So I feel very lucky about that I can have those two things interwoven. And a lot of my work comes from capturing my daily life. So it felt like a very natural progression to go from just recording the machines into, making those field recordings into sound piece. My work, I do a lot of work in sound, and I do a lot of work with textiles. So that of course is kind of how the garments came about. Camille was really keen to have a haptic element. So the VR piece is it's collision, if you like, of a lot of areas of my practice that I work on all the time. VR felt like a very natural meeting point for those elements.
That's interesting because you have that haptic suit.
Yeah.
And it kind of represents also the I think this is how I found it. Like it kind of represents the lymphs regarding the sewing style of the jacket, of the vest.
Yeah.
Maybe I can say. And we see during the experience, we see that the other body, like that
Yes.
created by lymphs, actually is healing you. And, so you're wearing this, and at the same time during the experience, you're also interacting, kind of like encountering that body.
Yeah.
Right?
Encountering. Yeah. It's an encounter for sure. Stitches. The stitches were, they were really representing something around the idea of your body becoming like land. Because as you are going through a treatment for cancer, anybody going through treatment for cancer, you become less human, and your humanness is less animated as human, and you become more stagnant and slower, lumbering more. So the stitchings are actually, they represent a couple of things. There's the idea that as you're stitching to try and keep yourself together, you're always unraveling. So you're constantly kind of going over the same motions to try and keep yourself together. And then the other thing is the relevance of topography and cartography. So literally drawing the body as a map and drawing all of the, right?
Right. And which was the mountain? Like you actually drew that topography regarding a real field, and where was that?
That's in Ireland, on the west coast in Sligo, which is where I live. At this
it
mountain.
Was so beautiful because, because we make that connection and with the field and as you regard, like we are part of the nature.
Yeah.
And we are kind of finding ourselves deeply more into the nature and how it works and how it heals itself.
Yeah.
So being on the field, it was feeling so natural, like as yourself, and it kind of helped me a lot more to emphasize, like making the empathy, like making the connection with all the journeys, like your story, the other people's story. That connection with nature made me even more connected and immersed. And like, what were the most significant technical or emotional or in any ways, like challenges you faced during bringing MAMMARY Mountain into life and executing the whole project? Like, because there are lots of faces, like what was your challenges?
Well, doing a lot of different jobs concurrently, when there didn't feel like, towards the end, we didn't feel like we had enough time to really finish it in a way that was remaining true to the piece. But we had spent a very long period of time in the research and kind of pre-production stage. And that was so good, because then when it came to actually executing the piece to have it ready for the first time that we showed it, it meant that we didn't lose anything, because we had put so much time into the research and into the pre-production. So that was really important. But I did find it challenging from the point of view of understanding how all of the threads from the different life journeys of the participants were kind of meeting in this multiplicity of layers, and ensuring that all of those voices were central to the piece was definitely a challenge also, without focusing too much on the story that I was telling, to have that more as like a structure on which to place the other pieces, the other testimonials and the other journeys. So yeah, and I guess storytelling in VR is definitely challenging, because there's a real need for it to be authentic, and because you're kind of almost entering into an imaginary world or a dream world. It's really important to keep the tension between the reality of the story and the imagined dream world that you're bringing people into, without letting either of those things be too prominent.
Oh, yeah.
So keeping the balance, I think, is really important, and was definitely challenging in a very good way.
I mean, I see the whole work as of course it's deep and emotional, and but I see it as an artwork, as an execution of harmony within life, which is so vital to understand ourselves and understand our human bodies, like what we are going through, because everyone is going through something, like, and I think your work showcases a deeply intimate perspective on cancer treatment. And what message or conversation do you hope that Mammary Mountain sparks, both within the immersive art community and among those outside of it?
Well, there's the issue of going through treatment and having this idea of an illusion of choice. So really, it's the bomb in the warehouse to catch a mouse a lot of the time. Going through a cancer treatment, you know that you're pouring toxicity into the body, and that is the experience for a lot of people. But you also know that it is proven that a lot of people come through this and get to continue living. But I suppose it's about validating the experience for other people. It's about enabling people to feel that they can talk about it. It's about maybe illustrating to medical professionals, illustrating the vulnerability that occurs during such treatments. So we would really hope to be reaching some of these audiences, to be reaching people who are maybe training to be cancer oncologists and doctors and surgeons, and also people who are caring for loved ones or in the vicinity of friendships where something like cancer is happening, and really just allowing to a certain extent, allowing the reality of the situation, but allowing the kind of the validity, and allowing people to feel that they've shared in something, rather than being excluded, because I think a lot of people do feel very alone and excluded from society. And like I said earlier, this idea of the body kind of betraying you almost, the things that you always thought you could rely on your body to do, you can't really do anymore. So it's, yeah, I think in terms of just getting the piece to more and more people, because 1 in 2 people is going to be affected by cancer. Every time, by the time
2050, I guess there's a report.
Yeah. And there's a really strong message about the ecology of the body and the ecology of our environment. And as we poison our world and as we poison our environments, more and more people are getting cancer. And I think the message in the piece is that we are not separate from our world. We are just another element of the greater ecosystem. And I think, that's really important. And that is something that we're hoping that people take away from it. This connectedness, the interconnectedness of us in our world, to each other, to other non-human entities, etc., etc.
Yeah.
I have a frog in my throat.
Oh no. Please drink water. And we are just I'm just so thankful for this interview, but also for you, to Maf'J, to Camille, for bringing MAMMARY Mountain into reality. And because this is also kind of a taboo when it comes to health, or the kind of experiments and experiences in our lives may not always felt to be, voiced. You could have easily choose to, not get there, like, just, you could choose to, okay, I will forget this, like, I'm over this, like, you could do that, but you chose to share it, so it can and with in this beautiful artwork, you chose to make it and share with the people, so we can also understand and feel that none of us are none of us are alone on this.
Yeah.
And we are all affected, like animals, plants, humans. We are all affected somehow. What's going on in the world right now?
Yeah.
And thank you so much for making MAMMARY Mountain. And thank you so much for the interview. Like, I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you, Selen. Thank you for gathering us together to get us to talk about it.
Yeah, I hope we will have more chances together, and
I hope
and
so.
do more things. But
I would love to come to Istanbul.
Oh yeah! Oh please, yeah. Like, I mean, this is one of my another dream, like bringing the projects to here. But let's see, let's see. If there are any sponsors, like, yeah, why not?
Oh yeah, amazing.
We can totally do it. Like, we can totally do it. But yeah, thank you so much, Tara, and enjoy the rest of the day. And
thank you.
That was such a delight to talk with you.
It was equally delightful for me. It's lovely that you're showing so much interest in the piece. And your questions were really insightful and well considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Camille, thank you so much for joining me on Exerventis, the first interview series. And we just recently talked with Tara about MAMMARY Mountain. Now I am so looking forward to hear you and MAMMARY Mountain. And you spoken about your journey recently on dance and integrating technology into embodied experiences. And how did your background in dance and wearables inform the creation of MAMMARY Mountain VR, especially in terms of translating intimate and very personal experiences into a shared immersive space?
Like, well, actually, on some level, it influenced the project I did before MAMMARY Mountain, which kind of gave me the confidence, I suppose, to sharpen it for MAMMARY Mountain. But my project Into Her, which I made finished in 2021, and Maf'J was a creative technologist on that project as well. The dance piece, I would say, was more loose. I've been working with this idea of participatory performance since I did my PhD, and the concept being that we're all performers. And so it's very akin to my concept of experience design, which is not the same that's been used in the commercial industry, which has been mostly focused on web design and making nice experiences in web design. But one of the things that I guess I brought into my studies and then into my practice was the idea of making an experience for others that is allows them to be performative. And I guess that stems indirectly from my dance experience. But when I was making Into Her, I wanted to create a space that was supportive, but also gave some room for the participants or the visitors. And so whatever I learned in that process with Into Her, I felt was important to bring into MAMMARY Mountain more informed. And I guess there wasn't enough performance for me in Into Her. It's very much more bringing people into a space. It was my first installation. I've always worked in performative projects or performance. So Into Her was my first installation. But I felt after doing that work, which was hugely rewarding and had really good feedback as well, in addition to the other motivations for making MAMMARY Mountain, one of them was that we needed a performative dimension to it to make it, to pull people into the experience. And I had written a book a few years prior, well, 2018, where I examined different modes of technological performance, particularly using a mobile phone, but more broadly wearables and other kinds of mobile devices, including, AR, VR, that kind of thing. And from that experience of researching that work and looking at a lot of interesting performers using technology in different ways, in particular wearable and mobile technology, I really felt there was a piece that the performance world understood much better around creating an experience that brings the audience into it and sort of envelops them on this narrative journey. And we needed to bring some of that concept into this sort of onboarding, offboarding dimension of the project, so that we weren't just putting a headset on somebody, we were inviting them into a world.
Right. Because during the Venice, unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to get into installation, but you had the installation there. So, and your earlier work focused more on capturing signals from the body, but MAMMARY Mountain VR kind of shifts toward creating sensory feedback and actuation.
Mm-hmm.
And how did this evolution in your approach influence the storytelling and the emotional depth of the project?
Well, I was, in all the other projects, I was really trying to uncover invisible knowledge from the body. So I needed sensors to do that, right? And it was all about also how do we communicate these invisible proprioceptive experiences or sensations, or even some of it's below awareness, right? So how do we capture things that are going on in our bodies below awareness? But in this case, it was, the story itself is about invisible bodily experiences and the emotional impact of these health experiences that people are going through, which is also an Into Her. And that idea of making the invisible visible was already happening in the storytelling. And so what I thought both projects could be doing something else, which is sending information back to people in a way they're not usually used to, but is very much embodied as opposed to intellectual, in that the emotional and visual experience, audio-visual experience of the VR can take care of sort of intellectual and emotional dimensions. But how do we get people to feel like they're in somebody else's shoes, experiencing something? Okay, it's not exactly the same, obviously, but something that they makes them think about their bodies, and this could happen to me, or this is where it would happen if I were going through it. And just that sense of building on the narrative, but adding an extra. I think in some ways the embodiment is more effective or affective in underlining the emotional experience of the stories. Because I think, you'd have to be a very cold person to listen to the stories and not feel emotional. But I think when you add that layer of putting it on the body, it then becomes not an external thing. This is somebody else, but this could happen to me. So I think it just adds that subjectivity to the storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, very, very much so. And because I'm also feeling a bit biased in that sense of my dance background, my theater background. So I'm like, I'm not sure how would it be reflecting on a person who has not experienced that much of an experience with their own body, right? Like, let's say body awareness, but like, how would they feel when they get into MAMMARY Mountain? So you have had a long-standing interest in participatory performances and creating experiences where the audience can interact or perform within the space.
Yeah.
And how did that philosophy shape MAMMARY Mountain, and what do you hope participants take away from the experience?
I guess it's again that sense of, maybe it's positionality might be the right word, putting themselves in the same position. It's a part of empathy, obviously, but I think, there's been a lot of talk in the VR world around, VR as an empathy machine, et cetera, et cetera. But I feel like that can only go so far. So the idea of putting people slightly more in the position of the, if you want to use narrative language, the protagonist, it's the philosophy for me is just that it's pulling people more and more into the story. VR is already doing that. How do we do that more to feel like this is more something people can identify with? And if they haven't experienced, for example, breast cancer, especially breast cancer, but even with Into Her, where it's about reproductive diseases, okay, like there's almost 1 in 2 of us will get cancer. Okay, this is now the statistic, which is shocking. And so if we don't get it, we know somebody who has had it or is going through it. And so there's that part, which in particular MAMMARY Mountain is good at. Even with Into Her, there was, men who tried it and were like, oh, now I understand what my partner's going through. So that people say that it's different than a film and even other VR because it's putting you straight into that positionality, that sense of being, being affected, like the body is being affected. And so it's deeper. It's almost that animal sense of empathy that is slightly deeper than something on your face, something even separate from you. I mean, film can do quite a good job of bringing us into stories. And, a lot of it's not just the technology and the garments. It's, we all obviously had to think about what is that journey that people are going to go through, and what is the typical journey for breast cancer. It's not the only journey. I mean, we had a lot of different stories and a lot of different journeys. So we tried to represent as many as the possibilities of what can happen to people as possible. And so there's, I guess, that sense of A, this could happen to me, this has happened to me, B, or C, I know somebody who's been through this. So there's really almost no escape for people in terms of that sense of connection to the storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, when I was going through it, because I was, again, unfortunately, I was not experiencing it on the installation, but I tried it at home, and after I experienced it again, like just before any break, because I really wanted to dive into the whole harmony without any distraction because at the same time I'm thinking about like what kind of interaction do I take in here, or should I do this? But on the second time, I was really more able to get into the story and let myself go with the story, because there's that poetic connection with nature and landscapes just directly taking me to whatever they're telling, and they're turning into one voice.
Yeah.
Right? Like everyone's journey is different and perspective is different, and background is different, but still I had the experience as one whole thing that invited me into live through and see all the phases from diagnosis to the end. So it was, it was very important to see how you're able to transform this kind of maybe painful process into an art piece, and without kind of making a propaganda of it. Like you're just not trying to create some kind of awareness, but there's a real connection there when you give yourself. There's a real connection with that people, with Tara, with other people who went through cancer treatment. And do you mind, like, if I ask you, when reflecting on your own cancer experience, you wondered if it was possible to translate something so intimate through a wearable? Like, how did MAMMARY Mountain become sort of a vehicle for conveying that vulnerability? And do you think like the immersive technology succeeded where wearables might not have?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because when I started Into Her, I'd initially thought of it being an audio and wearable only. And then I met Maf'J and we worked on it together, and she's like, no, I think we can still make it quite, you're going inside the body, so it will be dark, but you don't need to remove visual. So we worked on that kind of concept of how do you bring people into a story, and worked a lot on what's the relationship between the story and the haptic. And so again, there was a lot of this mapping that we did on that project that I really learned a lot in terms of how can we think about the body in different ways. Of course, there was three of us, so we had more conversation. We had a lot of conversations about it, right? And so where would it be situated? Why would it be in the on the breast, or would it and Tara's relating her story. My experience wasn't breast cancer. My experience was ovarian cancer. So, and I put all my kind of understanding of the cancer dimension that I experienced into her. And what I brought into MAMMARY Mountain was what I'd learned from Into Her, and the idea of mapping the metaphors. So mapping one visual metaphor to a sound metaphor to a vibration metaphor, and how will somebody experience that? And of course, we had to test it as well. And we took the metaphors even further in that Tara took her drawing style and brought it to the garment, and then brought it to the animation. So we took a lot of these kinds of metaphors that worked and tried to bring them into every dimension in order to keep consistency and congruency, but also with Tara's story being the spine, figuring out ways to kind of connect everything. And I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but just connect the different narratives of the other people who, some of them didn't go through chemotherapy. So we only brought their voices in the parts of the project that connected to that. And then the idea was then to figure out at what points do the vibrations come in? When does it make sense for the vibrations to come in? So, for example, again, with Into Her, it was very literal. It was like, here we're doing something around cervical cancer. We're going to vibrate just above where the cervix is on the lower abdomen, of course, on the outside. With Mammary Mountain, it was like, okay, we're doing radiotherapy now. What kind of vibration will communicate that story in a way? And it was a little bit more abstract with Mammary Mountain. It was and trying to figure out, what kind of how intense should it be? What should be the patterns? And how does that relate to the story? So there's a lot of negotiation and conversation and revisiting all the metaphors and revisiting all the storytelling. And so it's kind of an iterative process. Like Maf'J said in one of the interviews we had recently, it was like, I would edit the stories together. I'd give that to Tara. Tara would add in her story and her poems and her music. And then she'd work with Maf'J and think, how do we manifest this visually and add all the dimensions? And then, of course, Tara and I would later on work on, okay, then how does that go back to the body? And how do we think about the vibration and the intensity on the body and in the location? Of course, we had limitations in terms of the kind of electronics we chose to use and what they could do and how much effort they take to charge, and to, there's a lot of other technical issues that come into play that don't always, give you the results you want necessarily. So we had in Into Her, I had some difficulty. If there was any problem, I had to listen to the whole story, and it's 16 minutes, not 23, but still I had to listen to the whole story to figure out what the problem was. Whereas we just, made some choices around if there's some issues we have to fix. And this is, again, not your question, but I think it might give you a better sense of things. If we have to fix something, we need to have discrete story points. And this relates to the electronics as well, because we have to interrupt the electronics. With Into Her, if I had a problem with the story and I had to fix something, I had to disconnect all the electronics, which damages them. So there's a lot of things that from Into Her we put into Mammary Mountain, because there was that learning, that background. And I'd worked with Paul, who did the electronics on on Into Her as well. So it was kind of bringing that, again, that learning from one project into the other, and to make it more sophisticated, to have spots where we could stop it and take a look at what's going on. How does that relate to the intensity of the, or the vibration, or is it vibrating in the right place? All of those kind of technical questions. So it's trying to make sense of the poetics and the storytelling, and then bring that into the technical, and then make sure it makes sense again in the storytelling, so this the kind of looping around.
Yeah. And your past collaborations with Tara and Kate Sikio and have focused on combining movement, technology, and communication. And those how did those experimental projects contribute to the techniques or themes explored in MAMMARY Mountain? Because you say like there were there are lots of choices to make, and not only in the means of narrative and story or artistic choices, but in some point technology is also kind of shaping how you tell an idea.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Kate and I learned we tried to work a lot with conductive materials and inks and fabrics, and use as little electronics as possible. But what we learned is there are downsides, especially because we were working with dancers. And dancers, as one of the engineers we worked with, Becky Stewart, said, are like super users. So meaning if it's going to get destroyed, they're going to do it first. Whereas in MAMMARY Mountain and Into Her, people are not handling the electronics that much, or they're not touching them. After 300 people get into the garment, you're going to have some damage. But whereas with work with Kate and I, we had to bring the engineer with us to every performance, because they break literally sometimes between performances, right? And so I learned a lot about dealing with robustness and how robust does it need to be, and how but also how flexible. And this is why we brought in Sophie Scotch. I knew Sophie from other interactions that I'd had with her in a group I used to run, which is still running now, but I'm sitting in the back burner now because I was doing other things. And it was called Stitches. And I met Sophie through eStitches. Also, actually, she'd been a PhD student of Becky Stewart's. And we had actually initially really wanted Sophie to use conductive materials. And I'd had this vision. I saw this really interesting work. Anne Loeb. There's a woman I met at a conference who's German, but she lives in America, and she'd made this really amazing sort of touch sound shirt, and she'd worked with this really nice conductive copper, and so I was like, oh, we need to try to use that because it's supposed to be very robust, and it doesn't have the same wear and tear, and she'd put on a silicone cover to protect it so that it wouldn't rust and have damage. So we started with that idea, but I think things changed, and it ended up that Sophie worked with Paul to create more of a housing for the electronics that was also what became the design for the garment. So she kind of worked on two levels. She was kind of, in the end, became more of like a wearables consultant, designer, working with Tara on the visual and the fashion side of it, and then working with Paul in the integration of the electronics. But I think there was a part of us that thought it would have still been nice to work with conductive materials, but ultimately they would be difficult to, like, we can take all the electronics, out of the garments now. It takes some effort, but ultimately they all can be taken out. And if we wanted to wash the garments, it's slightly easier to do that. If it was all conductive materials, it would not be possible, right? They would be, and they get more damaged in some ways. So that's the learning I mostly learned, is like trying to make decisions about how robust does it need versus how light and sort of experimental. I mean, the thing that there's a lot of interesting things going on working with conductive materials and e-textiles, but at the end of the day, there are two really big barriers to uptake, at least in my mind. I would like to keep trying to use them because they're more beautiful and they're more lightweight. But at the connection point, it's so easy to break. It's still the same with regular electronics, but usually the connectors tend to be A, more easily replaced, and B, don't break in the same way. And batteries. I mean, we're using pretty big LiPo batteries, and they take 8 hours to charge. And that's because we need to be, and they last a long time, but they need to last all day if we're doing an exhibition where we're having people come in and out and in and out. So there's things like that. And batteries for wearables are always a problem because LiPo batteries can be quite dangerous. They don't let you take them on flights. And every time we travel, we have to like figure out how to deal with. So there's all these kind of weird, kind of additional behind the scenes kind of things that probably people don't think about, right? But those are the kinds of considerations that I learned a lot about working with dancers who, as super users, break it every time and show you what its value is. I mean, there was an idea that Becky and I had at one point where we could try to find ways to make electronics for super users, or for like working with wearables for super wearers, but that we didn't go anywhere with that. But I think that's the limitations of some of the e-textiles. And so if I continue to work with haptics or even sensors and haptics, which is what I'd like to do, is integrate them again together, not just one or the other. I think I'd want to have a slightly bigger budget to really test out and make more robust electronics that don't break. I mean, it's not possible to make them so they never break, and this batch of electronics that Paul implemented is much better. And it's easier for us to figure out what's going on. He's trained us fairly well to figure out what to do when there's a problem. We've got quite good at that. But anytime you add electronics, this is another learning to one of these kinds of projects, even though it's all the things I said before around connecting with the body and, has that really strong connection to the storytelling, it's going to be a pain because it's so much more to think about than just a story and a headset. There's so many more steps. There's so many more things to think about. So occasionally when people have said, we'll just take the APK, we don't need your whole installation, your whole garment. There's like, on the one hand, there's like, oh no, we made it for this. But on the other hand, we're like, okay, we need a break from that because it's such there's so much more scope for problems.
Yeah, I hope I hope the more partnerships, sponsorships, and all kind of support will come to your way and MAMMARY Mountain, because I think this project is going to stay kind of updated, I think, because as you said, like the cancer rates are rising. So I really wish everyone has a chance to experience MAMMARY Mountain.
Thank you.
As an installation.
Yeah. Well, it really does. People had reported, especially in Venice, but other places as well, that that kind of aspect of being brought into a surgery or a clinic and being met by medical people or people pretending to be medical people, and having to fill out a consent form really puts them in the mindset of, I'm going to have a treatment. And we try to work on that idea of like, let's put people into the headspace of someone who's about to have treatment. And so we try to keep that whole theatrical dimension in it. So every time we show it, we're definitely, we've got our Crocs and our lab coats, and we've got our clipboards, and we try, especially in the greeting, in the beginning, in the onboarding, it's very much about staying in character. We're doing a treatment with you. You will experience some sensations, like just trying to keep in that as if you're a clinician. If any moment you need some help, we're here to support you in your treatment. Like just trying to keep the language and the performativity into it, so that then they really are transported first physically and then mentally into this headspace. And we've had really good response. I think it was Liz Rosenthal, the curator of Venice Immersive, said that unofficially she heard a lot of people say that they thought it was one of the best onboarding and offboarding. And I think because it's such a sensitive, emotional project, I think that really was essential to all of us. I know we all feel that, without it, it's not the same thing. Because, London Film Festival had their own invigilators, and they just had headsets, and we could see the difference in the experience people were having.
Yeah. I would literally prefer to, have this on installation with you. But unfortunately, I didn't have a chance in Venice because we were also performing. But
one day.
But one day, and hopefully maybe someday in Istanbul, who knows?
Oh, that would be brilliant, yeah.
Or somewhere else in the world.
Yeah, sure.
But you keep on doing your amazing work, and thank you so much for executing MAMMARY Mountain, such a project. Like, it's so important. I think the world needs to see this right now. And so thank you so much, Camille, and thank you so much for the great interview, joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for asking us. I think it's really interesting, and the more people who know about the project, I think the better. We're trying to reach out to different kinds of distribution and promotion modes, and figure out what the best approach is. I'm speaking to NHS. They're called the Health Innovation Network in the UK, around how to. It's a slow process, though. It's like conversations and emails, and it's very slow. But trying to go that avenue, and then we're trying to go some other avenues. We've just signed with a company that connects you with different kinds of brands and brand agencies, or it's sort of a branded. It connects you with brands who will then promote, and we're trying to focus on charities and cancer-related or breast or women's kinds of, mostly charities. We'll be very discerning about other kinds of brands, but the idea being that we really want to bring in different audiences. Hi! So I guess you want to say goodbye, right?
We can just transfer to the Maf'J from here, but
no, we're wrapping up.
No, we're wrapping up, and it's great to have you both in here. And but thank you so much, Camille.
No worries.
This is such a pleasure and great talk with you, and I hope to, meet and talk soon.
Yeah, sounds good.
Again.
Okay, take care.
So
bye.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too.
And yes, Maf'J, thank you so much for joining me on this interview about MAMMARY Mountain and about your role on this great project that I just recently experienced and felt so much about it. So can we just go dive into how's your background in that interactive art brings a unique perspective to MAMMARY Mountain, and how did your process of creating rules and experimenting with systems shape the visual and interactive elements of the experience, especially when dealing with such a personal narrative?
Well, firstly, thank you, Selen, for inviting me to come here. It's really great to see you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I've come from a background of interactive arts, which stemmed from visual fine arts, really. But the difference was that I always had a lot more ability to express my art form through interaction with other people. So it was really important that there's always an other that I'm exploring the subjects with. And at university, my final project in my BA many years ago was around stroke. And stroke is also a very disabling, very difficult subject. And even there, experimenting with how the audience would interact with our installation, which we created a 3-part installation for that project, came down to, are you a victim, or do you have choice? Are you passive? Or are you active? And those kinds of questions come out also in MAMMARY Mountain. For instance, when we experimented with ways of engaging the audience, we thought, how much choice do you have when you are going through a treatment? And there is an illusion of choice, and there is some choice, but really it seems like the decisions are always made for you by the doctors, even in the surgery, which seem to have the most choice. Like, do you have a reconstruction or don't you? But everything like diagnosis, the biopsies, the surgery. You have no choice except to completely disassociate yourself with the system. So you're either in the system or you're out of the system. And we've heard stories that people do that as well, but we weren't really covering that aspect too much. This was people going through the system. And so as an artist, I'm always interested in how do we give you the choice without making you feel completely like victimized? And so there's that fine balance to giving you a feeling of presence and kind of interaction in a sort of active passive way, if you see what I mean. For instance, in MAMMARY Mountain, we had various moments where you're passing through something and you have the ability to have, we've given you 6 degrees of freedom, right? So it's not a 360 video. You can look around objects. And at some points where, for instance, there's some petals falling, you can put your head underneath and petals
I did that
on your face. Right. And some people try to catch it.
I also did that with the illustrations falling down on me. I was like,
yeah. So there's an element of being in it and having some agency, but really the same story is going to play out regardless of your choices. You can move, not move. You can stand up. You can even walk around. And when we have the installation, I do I say to people, you can stand up and you can move around. Just be mindful of the chair and your space. But also we had to be careful with the audiences because we knew that we needed to make an experience for all ages, maybe not children. We didn't want children to see it, but every age. So that meant that they were going to have to be, and some people have never done VR before. Quite a lot of people that we showed have never done VR before, and this was going to be their first time. And we had so much to tell them. So we had to limit the interaction to that idea that you're passively active, if you see what I mean. You're passing through things, things are happening to you and you're feeling them, but you're not really in control. And this is one of the first projects that I've taken away most of the control from a user.
Oh, and you mentioned your earlier work about stroke and on themes like that kind of family dynamics, maybe grief, illness, often tackling the invisible aspects of human experience. How did those themes evolve in MAMMARY Mountain, particularly with the inclusion of the vibrating garment and externalizes that internal pain?
I think using props or objects that you can touch in some way is also really useful. Even some people held one of the cushions. We made 3 cushions, and sometimes people holding these things while they're experiencing it gives them some comfort, right? In Stroke, the installation, there was a lot of things that you could interact with, and some of them were kind of, I'm not saying haptic exactly, but you were engaged in touching and feeling and seeing and moving. For instance, there's a glove that you had to put your hand inside, but it was too big. It was like a big gardening glove, and you had your left hand inside, and you were out of control a bit as well. So it's about taking away some control in a system that does that, and it's about the medical system really, and about how dehumanized you can feel sometimes. And MAMMARY Mountain, what we've tried to do is bring the haptic garment to earth your body back into your body, because it's very easy in virtual reality to be in a dream world where you're as if you're like dreaming. And we didn't really want people to just go off in a dream world. We wanted to remind them that their body is still here, even though their eyes and their minds are in this poetic, quite beautiful dream space. We didn't want you to forget that you had a body. So by wrapping you in the haptic garment and by having those sensations, they're not illustrative in the piece. It's not like every single moment that you're feeling something relates to a moment in the experience. It's just that they're more emotional, like they're regulators in some way, but grounding you. And by us wrapping you, we're bringing you into tightness, a held space, kind of like, and we're caring for you. So it's about our human interaction with your human interaction, being a little bit more caring than maybe what the medical profession would actually do. Because my experience of anything complicated in terms of illness or grief or loss or any of those topics, parenthood, big one that I touched as well in my work, mostly they're to do with lack of control. And it's about lack of care to other people. So you feel like you're at the mercy of other people's decisions about your life, or the incompatibility of 2 or 3 different points of view. Like you want something, your partner wants something, your mother wants something, someone's dying, the doctor's involved. You feel like frustrated because you lose the holistic sense of it all, and people, there's no time to sit down properly and talk it all through in terms of how do you like to be in control, how do you like to make choices. And I think that's what we try to bring a bit of back into MAMMARY Mountain. So even though we're taking control away from you, we're also bringing care to you. So
yeah,
it's an interesting space.
it is. I mean, because when I experienced it and listening all the different stories of all the people, I was feeling like, yeah, they have their different perspectives, but still, their reality is changing a lot, and that illusion of choice is playing a big role on their lives now, and they're kind of aware of what's happening, of course, but they're also kind of seeing the world in a different way.
Yeah, the aftermath of cancer is something that we've now been listening to a lot, because we've shown it to a lot of people personally, like one to one. And now we're hearing all the stories of people saying how it was, and how that sometimes it takes years before they can get to that place of emotionally processing kind of what happened, and the trauma of having that control taken away. It's almost like they're in a dream state where they're having to say, I can't think too much about this, because if I think about it, I'm just going to break down. So I just have to do it. And they're told what to do, and they just do what they're told. And then they go through all of the side effects as well. But things are happening to them. And years later, sometimes they're saying, I'm only now ready to start processing really the trauma of what happened. And also that I'm a different person now as well. So is that trauma informed, or is that just because they've lost a lot? You know, they've lost what we talked about before, about their sense of femininity, or their body has changed. They've suddenly been put into menopause. They're having to protect people, their relationship to their partners. Sometimes relationships break down as well. And all of these things. So we've heard all these stories now. And we didn't know all of that before. We tried to interview women before, but there was a lot of protection against them, for them, against us, in the sense that the medical support system didn't really help us much all the time when we asked for engagement with women's groups, support groups. I think they were frightened that we would traumatize them even more.
I mean, yeah, there's always that idea of like, how much should I share, right? Like how much can I go deeper, or like. But this is why I see MAMMARY Mountain as such a brave work, and in both the execution of the work as an artwork, but also in the reality, like, because this is so important to share the experience, the knowledge, all the processes, but also you do it in a way which is so poetic, so beautiful, and so immersive, like in the literal meaning of immersive, like it's so immersive. It took me away, it took me to the journey, and I really felt that I'm going through, and that I felt that, especially when I saw that big the healer body, made of lymph nodes, like that, it's over me, and it's like just over me, and I was like, oh, now I'm here, now I'm with you, now you're healing me. And it shows greatly like how the interaction between your body and the nature, and how they kind of heal each other, how they're not separated, but they're actually connected. So I would like to ask you about your like in the means of, you know, your because your career has spanned installation art, coding, and interactive design games, often rooted in deeply personal and universal themes. How do you see MAMMARY Mountain contributing to the evolution of immersive storytelling, what we say, particularly in terms of accessibility and fostering empathy in audiences?
Yeah, I think it's virtual reality generally has given me, like, it's perfect. My first degree, the one where I did stroke, my actual thesis was about dreams, right?
Oh.
And about learning from the dream world how we can create better as artists, because we can learn some things from dreaming. And at this point, you have to understand, historically, I'd never tried virtual reality. I'd never put a headset on. I'd only it was 1998, and I had never tried VR, right? And I'd only just had the internet. We basically had basic internet at that point. Yeah. So my understanding of what was possible in virtual reality was just something I desperately wanted, because for me, gravity and physics in the real world were a limiting factor for what I could make as an artist. So if you think for a minute that I was making installations where the physicality would act against me in a way that my imagination wanted more. Like, I wanted to be able to push myself through impossible spaces, through anti-gravity. I wanted to put you in water. I wanted to do things back then, but I couldn't, because it didn't exist. So the best I could do was animation or something on the screen. And so for me to discover VR was like, well, all of my creative dreams come true. And I already knew some of how dreams work. For instance, in a dream, you can simultaneously have 2 points of view. This is something that is very typical in a dream. Like, you can be driving the car, so you can have first person, but you can also be like somehow weirdly aware of seeing the car being driven. And it's that out of body thing. Also scale, change of context. It's very poetic. Dreams are incredibly beautiful things. And I wanted to bring that feeling, that surrealist feeling, into MAMMARY Mountain, because Tara and Camille, we're all very creative in that way. Working alongside Tara, particularly in the production phase, we brought a lot of this surrealist but also supernatural quality and mythological quality to the piece, which is quite witchy. I say this, I have said this before, right? Because when we designed the scenes, some of them we designed it together in person in Ireland. And at that point, I, as a UX designer as well, I had a clear sense of how I needed to organize myself to make the final product. But I wanted to leave enough space for co-creation so that Tara and Camille and myself, we could have options in terms of how to make it. So we did things like went for walks, we ate berries, we sang songs, we walked along the hedgerows, we talked about old women that look after hedgerows, we talked about nature, about the land, about the body. We sang, we felt in the body where that feeling comes. We did tarot readings. We finally made a timeline on her garden table. So she had one of those kind of picnic tables, and we put objects like a stone, a rock, some berries, and a Virgin Mary statue, a skull from a goat, all these different things. We put them on the table, and I asked her to arrange them in a timeline. And we recorded this. And we also, as she was telling me the story, I was spinning wool. Because we went up a mountain, and we took a drone. We had a friend of hers came with us. We took a drone up a place called, that looks like a breast. It's called Knocknaray. I don't know if she told you about this already.
No.
But there's a mountain called Knocknaray, which is near Tara's house. And we can't get to the very top. It's actually a burial chamber for a queen who is buried upright, standing, holding a weapon, pointing at her enemy. But you can't reach this place where she is. And we sent a drone. And at the very end of MAMMARY Mountain, what you do is you're standing on where the dead queen is, but half in, half out of the burial mound. Okay, so there's a lot of mythology. There's a lot of symbolism. There's deep connection to the land, to the folk, to the stories, to the dream space. And so we were able to create that. And for me, obviously, I had to create the world. We put the body in every single scene. You're either on the body, in the body, around the body, and there are different scales of body. So the body is the landscape, and you're standing on top of a body, or you're watching a body. And this was really important. Even in the scene with the water, with the particle molecules.
Oh, yeah.
You're in the body. That is a cave inside the body. That's the only scene you're in the body, I think. And so I love that we're reappropriating the scale of this creature, this body that you're watching move, but also you're inside of it like a landscape. And you're talking about the lymph nodes. There was this one symbol motif that we use quite a lot, which is the rock with the seaweed. And that rock and seaweed combination is in every scene as well. But it happens in the nature scene where you're finding the petals. It's hanging upside down, and I've added a few more, and it becomes like the cancer, but also like the healing. It's almost like the cancer and the healing of it's ambiguous.
Yes.
We've created a lot of ambiguity.
Yes, I felt that.
Yeah, because what happens, I'm fascinated by the idea that the audience is everybody, humans. We are meaning-making machines, right? We make meaning from the slightest provocation of two things together, we'll find a story. And so if you allow space for ambiguity, then you allow a space for the wandering mind of the audience to create the meaning, and you will create whatever meaning makes sense in your particular relationship with cancer. So someone whose sister's gone through cancer is going to make a different connection when they combine elements. So we're not too didactic about it. That's what I love about the poetry, and Tara has done that in poetry and music and sound. And so we've allowed a lot of space for ambiguity. The only matter-of-fact stuff is the voices of the women and the man. They are more matter-of-fact. And I think what people have commented after we've shown it is they like the fact that it's poetic and matter-of-fact at the same time, because it's like a weird fusion. It's almost odd, and yet it somehow works. You know what I mean?
Because I think it's very subconscious. Like it's touching you. MAMMARY Mountain is touching me in a very subconscious level, like you said, like a dream. So this is, I think, why you also go with the VR, and what you said earlier about like VR was not a very accessible medium on 90s. So now it's more accessible, and we are able to do, create and develop more things on VR. So I think this is why it is important, and why maybe you also put that medium as a form, the VR specifically. Like,
yeah, you just reminded me the second bit of your question, because it's quite a long. You asked about the accessibility of the medium for the user, for the audience. So we also make lots and lots of choices as creators. One choice that I make is to create for a standalone headset, because a lot of people don't do that. They prefer to go with the high-end headset, which would require a computer and a connection cable only to run that. Now that makes, every time you show that work, you have to have all of that equipment, and then you have to ship that equipment, or you have to do a lot of liaison with the venues to do that. I wanted to get rid of all of that. So I figured that if we could do it on a standalone headset that could cost £300-400, then that means that any venue can show that piece. Also, the second-hand versions of those headsets are now like $100, $150, pounds, whatever. They're very cheap. So we can put them in any kind of place. And I sent you a version so that you didn't require downloading 30 gigabytes of data. Our application fits inside 500 megabytes of data, right? The whole thing. And so that makes everything accessible, but that comes down to me having to really optimize as I went along. So I had to make choices, but I love technical constraints. They give me freedom artistically to push up against what can I do with this frame rate? What can I do with this thing? And I love squeezing the juice out of that.
Yeah.
You know? And I don't think that I could do that if I had to. Well, I found a pipeline that works for me. I think that's part of my artistic practice, is what I'm trying to say. And also we can give it to people in all kinds of environments, with or without the haptic suit, right?
Yeah. I mean, yes, because also you're developing, and while you're making your choices, and while you're optimizing the whole experience, you're also making choices about, maybe, like what do we say, killing your darlings. Maybe sometimes you're literally killing your darlings. So it's not only it's like, because there are lots of features on that project, like the poetry, like land recordings, audio recordings, all that elements are coming together and making one experiment. So on that sense, I think And thank you so much for optimizing it so well. So great. Like, I appreciate it a lot, because really, like, one of the challenges of the, VR projects is, like, everybody knows, like it is taking up huge spaces on computers, and you're just, it can drive you insane. And so in that sense, I would like to ask you one more thing about, like, particularly in terms of accessibility. We talked about, like, you kind of also foster in empathy in audience, but as kind of, I'm a neurodivergent person, and VR is kind of giving me that environment that I always dreamt of while creating something. So if we and in the resilience of MAMMARY Mountain, like, how is that experiment? How do you experiment that situations you also, when you also see differently as a maybe non-neurotypical person, to help you explore and convey that that I don't want to say complexity, because what complex is to a neurodiverse person is not complex to a neurotypical, but like, how was your approach and your workflow on that project, on that sense,
Oh, that's such a big topic.
I'm
neurodivergent also, but I'm so old at this point. I'm nearly 50. So, like, when I was younger, there was no language around neurodivergence. It was very polarized. So either you were extremely neurodivergent, in which case someone noticed, or you weren't at all. So I had to grow up with just not feeling right, but not having any language to understand that. And so I've always struggled in art school, in any environment where I have to work with people, because I don't think I approached anything the way that other people necessarily approached it. But the best place that I found, my soul place, was during IT projects that were complex systems. And this is literally complex systems. This is systems that everybody would agree are complex systems. And these are government projects, right? And what happens is you have agile teams. And I love agile. I absolutely am such a fan of agile, because it's the only methodology that is simple enough to be explained in, like, a few words, complicated enough that it allows every kind of type of thinking in a team, because it has, so it's almost like a religion, but I hate religion because of what it's been done. Only in sense of organized religion has caused a lot of harm. Maybe agile has also caused a lot of harm, but I still think that it's got a place for enough flexibility. And the key thing about agile is about change. So it has found a really great way of bringing together people and accepting, one, change is possible and absolutely going to happen. Two, if you understand and respect each other's autonomy and ability to self-organize, then you're respecting the fact that the change will happen and people will do it differently. And I love that, because I'm given the autonomy to be myself. Also, regular communication. And this term I love, called osmotic communication, which I don't know if you're familiar with. It's a nice word.
I'm not familiar, but
okay,
lovely.
So osmotic communication is like osmosis. You know the concept of osmosis. So it's that you're transmitting and transfusing knowledge through the membranes of people's hearing, mainly. The idea is that it's okay to eavesdrop in a conversation. So if you're with a group of people in an office, in one of these co-working spaces, it's okay to hear the conversation they're having with their boss or with their teammates, because you're learning something. And agile methodologies allow other people to watch you and to participate in what you're doing, but without having to talk to them. You know what I mean? It's like they see the information on the wall, they come and ask you questions, they'll hear your conversations. And it's about communicating through the membrane of, like, almost, it's a bit impolite, really. It's not very English. It's not very polite to listen to other people's conversations, but it's giving me permission to do what I actually find impossible not to do. If someone's having a conversation in the room, I can't not hear them, and I can't not listen to them. I have to literally put headphones on and la 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 la, because it's against my neurodivergent mind. I can't filter very easily sounds.
Yeah, like in public transportation, like I always put the earphones, like, because otherwise I'm just going to immerse into other people's horrible stories or something.
Time, 5 different conversations simultaneously. So it's hard, isn't it? So I think for me as an artist, it's impossible to separate the neurodivergence from my practice. And to be honest, by this point, I haven't even really thought about what exact features would a non-neurodivergent person have compared to what I have. And I think that's why I make interactive works. Like there's a piece that I've been making for the last 20-something years called Choice, Chance and Circumstance, otherwise called the Bean Game. It's about a game you play with beans, and it's about choices people make. And it's a connection game. But really, the main reason I make games, interactive games, is because I don't understand how other people think. And so because I don't understand, I need small pockets of experiments that I can play with these people that they won't be offended by, that we all agree to the rules before we do it. And then once we're doing it, it's okay. And then we stop, because then I feel like I understand them a little bit better. I can carry on with my life. I don't have to feel offended, or they don't have to be offended, because I can offend people by accident and then all feel paranoia for no reason. So I think neurodivergence is very difficult.
Oh yeah,
isn't it?
all the time, because you're kind of, like with the neurotypicals and neurodivergence, I think there's that's difference and kind of that hesitation. And in my I started experiencing anxiety in the very early ages, like 4 and 5, because of that communication gap or ambiguity. Like what's going on?
So hard. Yeah,
it's so different for me. But like, I basically, and it's I think it's also coming from. It's also coming with the age, because right now we are on a different age. Like after 2000s, the studies and researches and everything has changed in a very dramatic way. So even maybe when you're a kid, or when I was a kid, I didn't know what I was going through. I was just thinking I'm going mental.
And you feel weird. You feel weird, and that you don't belong, and that you must be.
Yeah.
And people call you crazy. I mean, early relationships were basically people calling me crazy. I'm a mad, crazy, stupid woman. That's the message.
Yes. It's a lot of stigmatized, a lot of taboos. And right now I'm just at least happy about like people kind of aware of that, like brains are not made in the same way. So absolutely. We are all different. So people are open to that conversations. I'm so happy about that. And that was really so good to talk about this and MAMMARY Mountain with you, because when I think about my experience, I really understand. I still process the layers of the project, because it is so many layers.
And do you feel like you want to go down into different layers? Because a lot of people never feel like they understand. They have curiosity to a point, and this is maybe a neurodivergence versus non-neurodivergence. I think curiosity is in abundance for neurodivergent people, mostly because we're struggling so hard to understand how the systems and people in the world function, the patterns. And so we can either do it as patterns, or we can do it as general. Let the what's the word? The incomprehensible wash over us.
Yeah.
But in general, we're curious. I take it by curiosity, because the more I understand, then it feels like the more I can function. But sometimes I just don't understand, and then I just have to accept. And now I'm more accepting of what I don't understand. So it's more like resting in uncertainty, right?
Oh yeah,
but only because I'm older now. When I was younger, I couldn't do that. I absolutely had to know. Or I had to pretend, and then at some point I just had to accept that there are reasons why things happen that I don't understand and don't agree with as well. That's the other thing. Sometimes I just don't agree with why there's so much corruption, and the blind eye is a real thing that I've noticed a lot, especially in systems where we pretend things are okay but they're not okay. Yeah, and I get very confused with that stuff. Yeah, but you seem to have the curiosity in abundance, and you then have this ability to dig into the layers, which I'm happy about, because I make all of my artworks with many layers, because people like you, I hope, come along like you have and have gone, I wonder what is under the hood.
Yeah,
and it doesn't always happen, so thank you.
All the time, because like this is why I had it one time, and then without any break I started again, went through again. and that was totally a different thing for me. Like, and I can go and do more. And I was like, when I was preparing the interview with you, Camille, and Tara, I was thinking like, I'm still like, am I covering enough? No, like, because it is so much layered. Like, I'm not covering enough. But I was just hoping this is this whole interview with you all. I'm so lucky to have it. We are so lucky to have it. And but this is just a humble attempt to have a glimpse about MAMMARY Mountain, but I just hope everybody have a chance to experience it, and ideally on installation. But yeah, thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's not. We haven't had as many of these conversations. I'm always really happy to talk about these
I hope
things.
we have many more chances to have these conversations with you and with the whole team. So I hope this is just the beginning. Thank you so much, Maf'J. Thank you so much, Maf'J. This is great.